Hi everybody, Jorge here, and today I want to talk about the roots of homophobia and heterosexism in our culture. So this is the first video in a series called Critical Awareness about Homophobia, and you can watch this full series on my YouTube channel. So what is critical awareness? Critical awareness is power. As opposed to simple awareness, which is merely acknowledging that something bad exists or is happening, critical awareness is understanding where it stems from, how it works, what impact it has, and who benefits from it. Those four pieces. And one of the biggest lessons that I have learned from studying social science over the years is that when it comes to any kind of inequality or oppression, racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, we absolutely need to understand historical roots of these processes in order to effectively lead conversations about them. Because historical roots of inequality are the place where the conversation should start. So the conversation shouldn't end there, for sure, but it is where the conversation should start, so we could successfully figure out how we can do things differently and how we can effect change that is meaningful and lasting. So when it comes specifically to homophobia and heterosexism, I've got this critical awareness from the research that I did for my book, Soul of Silence. So I wasn't raised with this critical awareness. I wasn't taught it at school, I was born and grew up in Russia. And so I was raised without critical awareness about things like racism, sexism, white supremacy, classism, homophobia, heterosexism. And it was only in adulthood when life confronted me with irrefutable evidence of the harm that these kinds of oppression create in individual lives and also in economy on a large scale. It was only then that I realized the imperative of growing critical awareness about those things and basically spreading this awareness. The imperative of speaking truth to bullshit and speaking truth to power. And, most of all, I realized that it's my responsibility as someone who holds many aspects of privilege to talk about inequality and oppression. So I shouldn't sit there and wait for people who are targeted with the trauma to build the table and invite society for the conversation that's supposed to affect change. But it's my responsibility. It's my historical responsibility as a white person to talk about white supremacy. It's my historical responsibility as a man to talk about patriarchy and institutionalized misogyny and so on. So, in order to lead these conversations effectively, I first needed to grow my own understanding of those things, because you can't effectively communicate to others what you don't fully understand yourself. So with homophobia and heterosexism, it was very hard. As I already mentioned, I've lived my entire life in Russia, and quite unsurprisingly, I was a homophobe for the majority of my life. And so when the idea of my book came to my mind after my first life-changing trip to Spain, it's a different story how much this trip really impacted my life. But when one of the fruits that it yielded for my life was this idea of this book. And it was really scary for me to be curious about the topic of homosexuality and to ask questions and to read research and to try to learn more, because being a homophobe was sort of part of my masculinity. This is machismo. This is how we are raised in countries like this. But despite my fear, I realized that I still had to learn it, because the creative idea of the book was here in my mind and it wanted to be made manifest for me. And so I had to learn some uncomfortable things in order to bring this idea into life in a way that did justice to the value of this idea. Because this book was a novel. It wasn't a research book, but it featured a love story of two men. This is why I needed to learn about those things that I had never known about. And so its mission was to address homophobia among four other burning social issues, and I felt called to do it in a truthful way, not using my creative gifts to bullshit anybody, but using my creative gifts to tell the truth. So I needed research, I needed information, I needed understanding. And today, many years after that, I realized how life-changing this research was for me, because now I'm able to lead conversations not just about homophobia, but about intersectional social justice in a way that really connects and resonates with people. And I'm doing it on a daily basis. So I feel called to share this understanding and these skills that I have acquired, because by doing it, I share power. Like, I share with others the ability to effect change, and I'm not left with less power when I share it with others, because, like, it's real power. It's not power over. It's not finite. It's not like a pizza that only has 8 slices. So if I give you some of this power, I have less remaining to me. Like, it's not that way, because it's real power and it's infinite and it doesn't run out when I share it. I create more of it, basically, every time when I share it. This was quite long of a backstory, but now let's jump in. So what are the historical roots of homophobia and heterosexism? Where do the things historically stem from? The answer is homophobia and heterosexism stem from historically reinforced misinterpretations of religious texts. This is the truth. And countries that historically have operated on Judeo-Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, these countries have also historically dominated the world politically and economically, in the last 2 millennia. So in these countries and their colonial states, homophobia and heterosexism and homophobic violence have become part of the culture. And they were part of the culture for centuries because of misinterpretations of religious texts that were passed from one generation to another over and over again. And what are these misinterpretations specifically, and how today do we call bullshit on that? So it turned out that there are many misinterpretations dependent on the particular religion and particular denomination, but today I'm going to talk about 2 major pieces that are common for all Judeo-Abrahamic religions and that have informed the most of homophobia and heterosexism that we have in our culture today. So the first piece is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And I bet that these names sound familiar to you, and chances are that you have heard terms like, sodomy and sodomite, because the thing is that these terms are specifically applied to homosexual people. And we actually need to understand what is the story. What is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? Where is truth and where is bullshit in this story? And so maybe for those of you who do not know the story very well, I will recount it now. So Sodom and Gomorrah were 2 cities in those ancient times. And the story goes that their citizens with time became depraved and wicked, and they wallowed in abominable sins. And it's not clarified in this part of the scripture what those sins were specifically, but it is mentioned that with time there were fewer and fewer righteous people remaining in those cities, and God's rage against them and against the inhabitants of the cities grew exponentially. And so the culmination is that God sends 2 angels in disguise of pilgrims to Sodom. And so they come to the city, and just like ordinary pilgrims, they are looking for a place to rest and sleep. And they find no hospitality in the entire city, except when one of the few remaining righteous people here, whose name is Lot, invites them to stay at his house and to take rest and to eat and to sleep before continuing on their journey. And this is the tradition of hospitality that is common in those times, but it was very deficient in Sodom. But when the man of Sodom learned that Lot has those pilgrims staying in his house, then they surround his house and they demand that Lot bring these men out because they want to know them. And there's ongoing speculation among some biblical scholars about what this term "to know them" means. And it's an ancient Hebrew text, and over many centuries, so over many languages, the correct translation is very difficult. But based on the context of the story, it's still quite obvious that those men wanted to have sex with Lot's guests. So because Lot responds to them, "Take my daughters instead. They have never known a man," meaning they're virgin. And this is not particularly caring of Lot. This is not particularly, showing his fatherly love for his daughters. And it's sexist, let's be honest. But the point here is that the story goes on that these men do not want Lot's daughters, but they want the pilgrims. They want the flesh of the pilgrims, basically. And so they basically want homosexual intercourse with Lot's guests. And Lot refuses to bring them out, and they insist, and they start banging on Lot's door. And so then those angels just come out and make these men blind. Because, they're angels, so they have superpowers, they can do such things. And then they tell Lot that God's rage against the city has reached its boiling point, and they say basically, pack your stuff, take your family and your belongings, and get the fuck out of the city and never look back, because God's gonna destroy it with fire and brimstone. And Lot does so. So the story says that the next morning he escapes Sodom, and his wife is the only person who, despite the angel's warning, looks back at as they're living, and so she becomes a pillar of salt. And then, as promised, God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah and their inhabitants with fire and brimstone. And thousands of years later, today, this story shows up in our culture in slogans like, God hates faggots, faggots will burn in hell. And because for centuries it's been a commonly accepted interpretation that the abominable sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is homosexuality. And so when I first read this piece of the Bible and this interpretation in my childhood, I thought it was like maybe I was in second grade, I grew up religious, but I already exercised my God-given right to think for myself. And so even at that early age, when I didn't have a lot of knowledge, I already smelled some bullshit in the story, because the story sounded great. It was like an action movie, with fire and brimstone and God's revenge to wicked people. But there was something wrong about the interpretation, and it was only years later that I realized that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah doesn't describe homosexuality. It describes an attempt of a gang homosexual rape. And we have historically confused the condemnation of a gang rape with the condemnation of homosexual orientation. So this is the bullshit that we as a culture have been conditioned to believe, and this is what has been used to normalize and rationalize homophobic violence and the marginalization of LGBT people for centuries. Because, it makes total sense to condemn gang homosexual rape, and it makes just as much sense to condemn gang heterosexual rape. But it makes zero sense to extrapolate the story to homosexual people in general, to consented, committed, monogamous homosexual relationships, or to gay marriage, for that matter. So this is bullshit, and we have operated on it throughout history. So to say that the story of Sodom is a story about homosexuality is the same as to say that the story about an ex-murderer is the story about an ex, rather than a murderer. It's bullshit. And now I also want to call bullshit on the term sodomy, because this term has a very specific definition. So the definition of sodomy is any sexual activity that is not procreative. So, if you're a straight couple and you're having sex, maybe in some very traditional conservative missionary position, but you're using contraceptive pills, then you engage in sodomy. If you're, a straight couple, but you're practicing oral sex, that's sodomy. Straight couple with, anal sex, that's sodomy. So, it's not exclusively applied to sex in gay couples. Like, it's not about that. And the funny thing about this bullshit is that, so, as many of you know, I'm a doctor. I'm a urologist, and I also practice in fertility care. And so, over the years, I have had this very interesting experience when, I live in Russia, and in this country, we do have some regions where people are predominantly Muslim. And so, when these Muslim people come to me, and both men and women, and and I have to assess their history, and I ask them about their sexual experience. And so, the thing that I keep hearing very often is that So in their countries, in their traditions, in their cultures, in their religions, it is very important that girls do not lose virginity before marriage. So premarital sex is a taboo. And so what they do is that if they have premarital sex, they engage in anal sex instead of vaginal sex. And, technically this is sodomy. Because this is sodomy. This is something that their culture labels as sodomy. But they engage in this and they consider it normal, but at the same time they are flagrantly homophobic. And so they apply the term sodomy to gay people. But not understanding that then they engage in the exact same thing themselves. So this is a sort of double standard here. And this is why I'm calling bullshit on this every time when I hear this. But the most mind-blowing thing for me about Sodom and Gomorrah is that their sins are traditionally attributed to homosexuality. They're abominable sins, and it's mentioned many times, but it's not, as I mentioned, it's not clarified what are those abominable sins. But just this is very remarkable. That just a few books further in the Bible, there's this book of Ezekiel, who was a prophet, who prophesied the forthcoming destruction of Jerusalem. And so in this book, it is written like God is speaking to Jerusalem through the words of Ezekiel, through the words of the prophet. And so God says, God is addressing Jerusalem as a city in his speech, and he's referring to Jerusalem as a woman, because in Hebrew cities were female, they had this female gender. And so God says, I'm quoting God directly here. I know it sounds scary, but here's the thing, that this is what God says. God says, now this was the sin of his sister Sodom. She and her daughters were overfed, arrogant, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them, as you have seen. And when I read, I just knew that, I learned that, maybe 2 years ago. And when I learned that, I'm like, holy shit, now this whole thing makes sense, because the sin of Sodom was not about men having sex with men or women having sex with women. It was about their citizens being overfed, arrogant, and unconcerned, about not helping the poor and needy. And this is what caused God's rage against them and their subsequent destruction. But the question is, if you're religious, how many of you have heard, how many times have you heard about this Ezekiel piece? How many times have you heard of this piece that describes the real sin of Sodom? And now comparing to the number of times that you have heard bullshit attributing the sin of Sodom to homosexuality. This is tragic. We've operated on bullshit and we've ignored the truth. And the truth that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is about privilege and hospitality, violence, and threatening vulnerable people, which is exactly what has been historically perpetrated on the LGBT community. It's not what gay or trans people did, but it is what we as a culture did to them. And so, if now you're shocked about why we have so long believed this bullshit, then please wait until my last video in this series, where I'm going to explain why systems of power have benefited, and many even today continue to benefit from this bullshit in an observable, measurable way. But for now, enough about Sodom and Gomorrah. Now I want to also talk about the holiness code. This is a part of the book of Leviticus, where, it sort of describes lifestyle, like what to do, what not to do. And so there's this piece that says that a man lying with a man as with a woman is an abomination. So this is the traditional translation of this. But it's not, and it's been used as one of the main pillars to rationalize homophobia. But it turns out that it's not as unequivocal as it may seem at first sight, because, first of all, it is it is translated from ancient Hebrew, the language that is no longer in existence. And one of the translations is that it's not a man lying with a man as a woman, but it's a man lying with a man in the bed of a woman. So it's not about homosexuality, it's about adultery, It's about fornication, if you want. And But this is the only thing that is sort of such as direct opposition to homosexuality. But even here, as it turns out, it can be dubious because it can just be an incorrect translation. Because, it's important because in this part of the Bible, there is a variety of views on things like incest, for example. There's not one view, but there's a variety of views. Like in some part of the Bible, it is condemned, then in other part it is normalized, and or other things like, for example, temple prostitution. Like today, in our today's reality, it feels like so completely out of line. Like temple prostitution, like, having people at places of worship that are prostitutes, and so you come to church in order to basically have sex with a prostitute as a part of a fertility rite. It's sort of like unthinkable now, but then it was normal, and it is the context in which those ancient texts, those biblical texts were written. So, you have to think about these things, including Leviticus, including the Holiness Code, within their historical context. And if you look at those things within the historical context, you can also see that part of this Holiness Code is that pig, for example, is unclean food, so do not eat pork if you're stick to the Holiness Code. Also, another thing is don't plant different kinds of vegetables on the same farm. Don't wear clothes made of different kinds of fabric. And, this perhaps made some sense in ancient times, but it makes no sense today. And every time that someone says homophobic things and that calls Leviticus at the basis for their beliefs, I just call them out and I say, do you wear the clothes that are made of the same kind of fabric, let me just show what is the fabric of your clothes. Or when you go to your country house, do you plant the same kind of vegetables on your farm, or do you plant a diversity of vegetables? So why judge this double standard if we don't live by this code, and we can't live by this Holiness Code today into this reality? Then why would we use it to rationalize homophobia? It's bullshit. It's double standard. And, I think that a lot of things about Bible is that we need to, the harm is created when we understand things literally, when we take them out of context, and when we do not apply critical thinking skills, when we just understand them literally, and in order to drive through some message that is traditional, that is easy, that is stereotypical. Because the reality is that there is so little material in the Bible where anything related to homosexuality is described. It's less than 1% of the Bible. So for the writers of Bible, it was not a priority to talk about it. And those few incidents where, we can see some same-gender sexual behavior, there is actually some negative connotation to that. There is a condemnation of that. But that negative connotation and that condemnation is in reference to violence and idolatry and exploitation and abuse. It's not about orientation, because in those times people did not have the understanding of sexual orientation or gender identity in the way that we have this understanding today, because they didn't have access to this evidence-based science. So they did not, in those times people could not understand orientation as an individuality trait like eye color or blood type. So there's even no term in Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek that can be translated as homosexual or homosexuality. So it cannot be claimed that the Bible says anything about homosexuality at all. It was not the concept that people had in their operating systems those days. They didn't have the understanding and the language for it. But one thing is important here. And the important thing is that there is actually a mention of some relationships that can be interpreted as same-sex relationships, but this is the mention that is positive. There is a story of David and Jonathan, which, there's a lot of homoeroticism in it, and it can be, and it is basically interpreted by many biblical scholars as the story of a gay couple. or there's a story of Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth. There's also a very important story about inclusion, because when Jesus came, and one of the values that he basically promoted is inclusion, is that the church is universal, so everyone is welcome. There's no discrimination about who's welcome, who's not, who's worthy, who's not, whose divinity is real and whose divinity can be questioned. So there's a story with the Apostle Philip given a baptism to the Ethiopian eunuch. So who's the Ethiopian eunuch? This is in that world, in those times, it was the person who was black. Basically, he had a black skin. Those people from Africa were called Ethiopian. Everybody of them, there was no distinction about ethnicity. And then the eunuch was a man who underwent ritual castration in order to serve on the royal court. So the thing is that this Ethiopian eunuch was sort of double outsider. He was, like today we would call it that he suffered intersectional trauma. He was an outsider both for being a eunuch and both for being black. But then the Apostle Philip, when he talks to him, and the eunuch says, why don't you, I want to join this church, I want to join the Christian community, why don't you give me a baptism in this pool on the side of the road? And the Apostle Philip says, yes, why not? Let's do this. So this is the moral of Christianity, that we are the inclusive church. And we do not exclude some people based on their individuality traits. This is bullshit. It goes against the very foundation of our religion. Or, there's also this piece in the Epistle to Romans where the Apostle Paul, he writes that Jesus is not male or female. So, he sort of just takes out this gender concept away from the concept of God. And so this completely, controverts our notion that the marriage is only between a male and a female, because the questions about male and female are absolutely irrelevant when it comes to God and when it comes to love and when it comes to practicing our religion. But what this tells, the important thing that these facts tell about is that in the Bible there are multiple voices, there are multiple points of view. There's no one single point of view. There's no certainty. There's no I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. There's no such thing in the Bible. There are multiple stories, multiple perspectives, multiple points of view. It's a whole body and a whole variety of wisdom and moral guidelines. But the question is, are these parts where, that have some positive connotation when it comes to same-gender relationships, are these parts of the Bible widely known? Are they mentioned by mainstream media, mainstream church? No. So, and here is the hard question. How is it called when we shed light on certain pieces of information and then we leave out other pieces of information in order to drive through some message? When we just focus on one point, when we focus on one place, on one aspect of truth, but we completely conceal the other? How it is called? Agenda. This is agenda. This is something that is widely employed now in political media, So, for example, for me as someone who lives in Russia, when we receive news about the Ukraine or the US or any of the countries that we have political tension with, we are shown only one side of the information and the other side is completely left out. So this is agenda. And there is no such thing as gay agenda, but there is a thing that is called homophobic agenda. And this is what we have done to the scripture. This is what we have done to our religion. We have left out some pieces in favor of others that are hateful and discriminatory. And so the takeaway message from this video is that there's no inherent indictment against homosexuality in any Judeo-Abrahamic religion. It's a cultural myth, and it's a myth that has been sustained by systems of power over. And in the last video of the series, I will talk in detail about that. But for now, I just want to leave you with this, that I'm a Christian, and my faith, it's the cornerstone of my life. And when people today ask me, do you believe in God? Then I ask them, and what do you mean by God? And even before they answer, I say, to me, God is love. God is courage. God is truth. And yes, this is the God I believe in. And one of the ways in which I operationalize this belief is by showing up and speaking up for inclusion, equality, and justice. And as a Christian, it's part of my historical responsibility to speak truth to bullshit when it comes to things like homophobia. Speaking truth to bullshit is what Jesus modeled himself and what he called us as his followers to do. And my church, despite what Jesus taught us, historically enabled and normalized violence and discrimination. And today it's my job, as well as the job of other Christians, to call bullshit and homophobia and to own the story of trauma and violence that we have inflicted on the LGBT community for centuries, and to figure out how we can do things differently today. Because homophobia and heterosexism, just like white supremacy or patriarchy, represent our collective historical story. But we can't write a different ending to the historical story without first owning it. And so we have to, just like we have to talk about historical roots of white supremacy, we also have to talk about historical roots of homophobia and its relation to religion. And so this is why I want to pay huge respect to leaders in our church and to leaders in other churches who, just like me, come forward and speak truth to bullshit. Even though they invite a shitstorm by doing so, even though they get laid off, excluded, harassed, targeted with violence. But we have to start doing this. It will take a lot of time to purge the way that we practice our religion from the bigotry that has been present here for centuries. But there's going to be huge resistance because this bigotry is one of the main pillars that support systems of power over. But those systems are making their desperate last stands right now. And so we have to be brave and do it together and facilitate the collapse of those systems in order to bring about different systems, the systems of equality and justice and universal dignity. And so my great respect goes to y'all who practice real courage when it comes to social justice, and to y'all in church whose respect for God is bigger than your need for comfort. And please know that today, advocating for LGBT people, you're doing basically the same thing that Lot did in the story of Sodom. You're putting yourself on the line in order to protect the vulnerable individuals from the violent majority. And so you're on God's side, and homophobes are not. So, thank you all for listening today. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for your time. I know it's been a lot. I have a lot to share in this regard, as I, did this research and have a lot of information. And, I love speaking truth to bullshit. And I love staying civil in the process, which is very hard. But, I would love to have a discussion about that. We need to have conversations about these controversial and really inflammatory topics. So we need to have a debate, we need to have a conversation. So please do leave me a comment below. I would love to have a conversation with y'all. And as this is another time when I touch on some topic that involves a lot of politics and religion, I can predict what kind of comments I'm gonna receive. So I'm gonna just tell you this one thing. So this is a policy on my page that I am very much interested in a civil and respectful debate. So please, I would love if you tell me, Jorge, you're dead wrong here, or you haven't considered this perspective. So consider this perspective, or let's talk about this. So I don't agree with this. Awesome. If you tell me this, let's have a conversation. But if you come here to shame, insult, name call, dehumanize me or anybody else within the comments, I'm gonna ban you. I'm gonna just delete your comments and I'm gonna ban you from the page because you contribute to nothing to the conversation. And this is not the space where spurring hatred and bullying and shaming will be tolerated. There are enough such spaces on social media, and this page is not going to become another space like that. So thank you all for listening today, and please, if you find this video insightful or helpful, please share it with your friends, and also don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time on Jorge Oro's YouTube channel. Take care, be brave, and bye.